Formally, professors, thank you so much for joining. I want to first give a couple thoughts because sometimes we do episodes that are very long-winded and have no point to it. Thankfully, this time we have a point to it. And I read the book. It was wonderful. I enjoyed it. I wanted to give you a couple takeaways before I start asking questions. Is that okay?
Ooh, yes.
Absolutely.
Okay. All right, Bob, Huggy, thank you so much. My two takeaways were this. When you expect a book, and again, it's the Friction Project, but when you expect a book to talk about friction, you're almost always assuming, okay, well, tell me about all the ways that we can avoid it. What I loved were the examples, whether it's Sergey Brin and Google Glass or others. My first big takeaway was like, oh no, friction can be good and necessary and needed. And I want to unpack that in a second. My other big takeaway was this. As a literary device, what I enjoyed were whether it was the example of, I believe, chicken fuckers. Am I right? Want to get that in real early, but also as a Yes, as a Michigander, the example about the very long form, which I very much know, and I live in the state. These examples were good, but when you read a book and you see an example and then it ceases to be, you're like, okay, and I've moved on. By continuing to build on the example and add layers to the example and use the example over and over and over again in different parts of the book, what I enjoyed about that is that you get depth and clarity to why that example is important, and you get to see it from multiple lenses. Those were the two things I appreciated. What I want to start with, and either can take it, and really I just want to say chicken fuckers, but where I want to start, I mean, how else do you develop rapport with people you haven't met than to just go with the expletive? But my first question, and either you can take it to start, and then I'll let the other one go, is when you're writing this, how quick in the process do you go, we need to have good friction?
How can you take that? I think you're a better observer of this than I am.
This is really a great question, Jeff. We were initially kind of drawn into the Friction Project because we discovered that anytime we presented material from our earlier book, Scaling Up Excellence, top and senior echelons of leadership loved it. But as we went lower down, people kind of said they said these ideas are great, but it's hard to get anything done. And so people would describe their workplace as a frustration factory, for example. Another guy told us, I'm swimming in a sea of shit and I barely have my head above water and they want me to show initiative. All those naturally led us to the land of bad friction. Obstacles that infuriate and overwhelm people. But as soon as we got into this land of bad friction, very quickly we realized that exactly what you mentioned, all friction isn't bad. Some obstacles are good, particularly if they slow down, educate, and foster deliberation. And what we kind of realized was friction is particularly effective as a deterrent to overconfidence and myopia.
Yep.
Because, the way, we've certainly kind of talked about it is what good friction does is it prevents people from choosing an overconfident and myopic version of themselves. And that's kind of what we need to do in organizations. So that's the job of leaders. Great leaders we noticed were doing.
I do. What I agree with Huggy's answer, and I would do a yes and that for me, and it came quite early in the project. There's one story that in some ways almost captures the overall view of the book and also the realization you're talking about, which is Laszlo Baku. Huggy has had as a guest in class, and we know well he was head of people operations, essentially head of HR at Google for 7 or 8 years. And there was a challenge, a tradition at Google that went way back to Larry Page and Sergey Brin, that when they built the company, they would do many, many interviews before they'd hire people, especially the first couple hundred interviews. They wanted people with great technical skill and also who were great interpersonal, who could be leaders they could grow the company with. Well, this became ingrained as a routine or a habit or a sacred cow, call it what you will. And when Laszlo got there, this giant companies, and they're doing 10, 15, as many as 25 interviews because it's a tradition.
Mm-hmm.
So that's causing all sorts of bad friction, the scheduling, the driving away candidates, just driving people nuts. And so he put in this simple rule, which is good friction, which a speed bump. If you're going to do more than 4 interviews, you have to get written permission from me. And it worked.
Yep.
And the reason I love that example is that it shows how good friction can be used to get rid of bad friction. And by the way, it shows that the exercise of authority isn't always bad. so I love that example.
No, I love that one, and immediately started thinking about the parts of Silicon Valley where Big Head is sitting on the roof and going, yeah, I can see this part. And also just generally speaking, like that hiring process basically became a war of attrition. Who could withstand the hiring process? Not hiring the best, but hiring the person who can, just deal with that process, which again, I guess you're then hiring a person who can deal with bureaucracy the best, but not maybe the best or the brightest or the most talented. Huggy, when you're giving that example, I'm thinking of myself and going, oh, well, I'm overconfident every day and myopic, and I'm a creative person. And I started out in experiential marketing, and I started thinking about the examples twofold. Like, one, yes, I should definitely be stopped. And I have multiple accountability buddies that are there to make sure that I am stopped from my own impulses, which is great.
Exactly.
The other thing is I was remembering the first year of my career. And unfortunately, when you are a deep creative who wants to blow things up on bridges and gets to, thankfully, United Way is the worst place to work in that context. I love United Way. I am passionate about the cause, and I'm still passionate today, but I realized very quickly I'm in the wrong place. I have to get so many things signed off to do this. This is never going to happen. So
you worked for United Way in Michigan?
That was my first job. Yeah, that was my first job.
Was Michael Brennan head of it when you were there? Or did you miss
different side of the state? I was in Grand Rapids, but
in Grand Rapids.
But same stuff too. It was like right post 08, and it was a great time to find a job, guys. I gotta tell you, it was a wonderful time to graduate college. But what I loved a lot of different examples, and that probably would have been one of the examples that I was going to call upon, Bob. But what was like the one conversation you had that's most memorable, most floored you about friction?
Go ahead, Huggy. I have one.
So, the one that was like for me, at least, as a kind of punch to the solar plexus was a young woman whom I can never forget. She said this with a quiver in her voice and a tear in her eye. And she said, I spend so much of my day doing bullshit work that exhausts me. When I go home, she said, all I've got left are scraps of myself for my family.
Yeah. Yep.
And that like basically floored me, to be honest. And I just felt it was very wrong that we live in a world where that's what's happening.
And the poorer and less able you are, the more that friction does that to you. So I actually, so Jeff, I actually have an optimistic one, and it was quite late in the project, and that's probably why it's in the last chapter mostly. Is so I had the privilege of interviewing a guy a couple of times who's been a guest in Huggy's class just a few weeks ago, named Todd Park. Todd Park probably is most famous.
Yes.
For leading the effort that actually fixed the Obamacare website. So when you clicked on it, it didn't take 8 seconds to scan the page. He led that effort. He's very good technically. So he and his brother Ed have started a company called Devoted Health. They're in about 15 states. If it's a startup, it's a big one. It's to help people like me over 65 navigate the healthcare system with less friction and more dignity. So I'm interviewing him. And he's like a hardcore software kind of guy, and he sold a company called Athena Health. He's really a capitalist. And I said, so like, what's sort of the key to get rid of friction at Devoted Health? He said, we start out with love. And our concept is that in every interaction our employees have with our patients, our customers, that we want that person to treat that person the way that they would want their mother or father to be treated, someone they love. And we start with that, and then we build back the logistics behind it. and also our routine of how we treat people. And I never quite got this idea of starting with love and moving backwards to logistics, especially from somebody who was sort of like a hardcore software engineer type guy. So
Absolutely.
that was quite striking.
So very well
Yes.
said, Bob. Yeah. Go ahead.
Okay, speaking of hardcore software guys, one of the things I did with my notes, which is going to make sense in a second, is, and I got this. If I go back so I was interviewing Touré, I don't know, like 12 episodes ago, roughly, and one of the things he said was, "Stop asking questions and just say a statement, let it sit, and see what happens." I'm going to try this. I'm going to let you know a note I wrote down, and whatever comes to mind, go with this. But I skipped the line. I'm not going in order because when you started talking about hardcore software guys, I was like, this might make sense. Here's a part from the book that I took away. Moving from move fast and break stuff to let's get excited about maintenance.
Go ahead, Huggy.
You know, here are the thoughts that quickly crossed my mind. The moment you said the word maintenance, Jeff, what flashed through my mind is a law that Bob and I have written about. It's called Dunbar's Law. And Robin Dunbar was a British social scientist, if you will. And one of the interesting things he did was he studied a lot of mammalian species, and he found that they devoted close to 40% of their time towards culture maintenance activities. So if you observe chimps and gorillas and baboons and so on, they kind of take the fleas out of each other or whatever it is. So it's culture maintenance. But the problem is they're doing it at a small scale. All that what crossed through my mind with that sentence is the larger the company, the greater ought to be the investment on culture maintenance, because culture maintenance is actually what's going to lead to friction fixing in an effective way. People actually then sort of say, hey, we need to, because for us, so that was one thought that crossed my mind. The second thought that instantly flashed through my mind after this study was the expression that we use in the book, mowing the lawn. There is nothing that better describes culture maintenance or getting excited about maintenance than mowing the lawn. And when we think of companies, mowing the lawn is the most important thing people need to get excited about.
Yep, I pretty much agree with Huggy, and I guess that the only thing that I would add is that everybody talks about how cool it is to develop new software. We're talking about software. And to come up with new products and everything, but if you don't keep them well maintained, the world literally turns to shit. I mean, it's like that. That's what happens. And boy, all you need is a good garbage strike to figure out how important that the trash people pick up trash are. So maintenance is a very important thing, and it's one of those things.
Oh, that example was great. The trash one. Oh, that was so good.
No, the people, the woman who celebrates, the people who pick up trash and
shook everyone's hands. Yeah,
she shook everyone's hands, and to me, that's one of those sort of themes that. And I had this idea from Bill Moggridge in the book, or we had this idea of things that you notice that you don't notice. Well, when it comes to maintenance, you don't notice it when it doesn't happen. I mean, when everything's messy, when something smells, when something's broken, and maintenance really is a beautiful thing. So,
Bob, you just did my job for me, and I really appreciate it, because my next statement, you perfectly led into. But before I do that, that was just me thinking of culturally, are we starting to get to a point where obviously we're always going to celebrate innovation? Clearly, where you live and where you work always does that. But we are getting to a point now, just in life cycles of whether it's tech or social media or other places, where we are starting to value, but is this sustainable? Can this work? And I'm not going to share bad examples, because I have friends and I don't pick sides. And as the Shorty Awards, we are agnostic. Who cares? But there are examples of times where something was super innovative and it didn't work. And usually you can point to these things behind the scenes. this is the other statement that I found really profound, and I'm just going to let it sit. And Bob, you led right into this, which was no one ever gets credit for problems that didn't happen.
Well,
Absolutely.
go for it, Huggy.
This is the irony. Bob and I have chatted at length about the penalty of proactivity. Who's a
Mm-hmm.
proactive person in a company? The company who anticipates a proactive person is a person who anticipates problems and heads them off before the shit hits the fan. But the problem is, since you've removed the problem, nobody can see the problem you've actually averted. It's not as dramatic and as eventful as recovering through a crisis. A crisis means the shit has hit the fan, and then you're kind of in rebound and recovery mode. Here, you're avoiding all of that, and precisely because all of that is invisible, the proactive actually tend to get penalized. That was kind of what we had in mind. So organizations say they need proactivity, but we don't think that they really reward proactivity.
Yeah, that's true. And I would do sort of yes and that that the Toyota culture, which
Yeah,
remains very
Yeah.
there's a reason that Toyota isn't Toyota still the biggest automobile company in the world? I think they are, and one of the most profitable. And one of the reasons is that that they have a quality movement that puts averting problems before they happen first. And so people might not think about Toyota very much, but they sure are doing well with a culture that goes back 40 or 50 years. And the reason that they moved to a quality culture, and people who studied the Japanese automobile industry, for example, was that they had to figure out some way to have some competitive advantage against the U.S. because they had much crummier cars than we did in the 50s and the 60s. And so they said, let's go after quality. That's a place we actually might have a competitive advantage. And a competitive advantage that they've had now for 50 years, 40 years, something like that.
I could spend 15 minutes in that industry, not just because I'm from Michigan, but because I find it fascinating in the different ways that, as an advertiser, I find it fascinating because when you have things that are basically similar, it's so hard to kind of like differentiate,
Right.
and then you get brand loyalty that sustains. That's an interesting conversation. There's an interesting conversation about how BMW goes in a different way of trying to create quality than Honda or Toyota. Honda or Toyota
Yeah.
are basically essentially nihilists that believe you're going to fuck up this car somehow. You're going to forget to do maintenance, and we're just going to make sure that this thing runs. We're going to make sure that this thing runs. Where the BMW says, well, if you do the regular maintenance, this thing is going to last forever, but not taking into account possibly the consumer that's like, yeah, I'm going to forget to do the oil change. I'm probably going to forget to do this. And speaking as a person who definitely waited 15 months to do an oil change, I do not drive a BMW. But all those things were wonderful. The other thing, I do not want to spoil the book, so I will not name the company that is very current right now. Which when I was reading it, I was like, oh. Because you gave a lot of really good examples that were also used a lot by John Oliver about a certain company that starts with a B, and the inverse of the example you're giving with Toyota. So I want this to be an intentional. Hey, you need to read the book to get the rest. We got to give them a taste.
Okay.
We can't give everything
Thank
away.
you.
But I loved that example of a company that's like, but what if we don't pay attention to that? And the eventual ramification, because the interesting thing is that the ramification is not immediate to those kinds of problems, right? You can definitely have a stock price go up and things
Yep.
can go well until it doesn't. And that part was interesting. The other thing that when you were talking, for people who are proactive, let me throw a wrinkle into this. I think it's actually, and I live this too, so I have personal experience. Sometimes when you're proactive and you see the chessboard and you know the two necessary moves, but you're absolutely crap at explaining it. I think it is incumbent on, and I've tried to get much better at this. I've tried to be much more succinct, much more detailed, do my research and come in with stats and figures, because I don't want to just be like, no, it's a feeling. I know it'll work. I want to be like, no, it's incumbent on me to tell you, here are the reasons why, and pull you to my side of proactivity of why this is going to fail, rather than just being like, oh, no, that's stupid. Don't do that.
Well, I have a comment about that. It reminds me of something that I heard Nolan Bushnell, who was the founder of Atari, the
Mm.
gaming. I interviewed him 42 years ago, and
Oh, wow.
and and he had this great line, which reminded me of why. Well, the line was that the best engineers sometimes come in bodies that can't talk. And having taught in the Stanford Engineering School for some 40 years, what that sort of reminds me of is that it
Mm-hmm.
might be incumbent on you to explain things that are the right things to do to people, but not those engineers and other people who come in bodies who are actually better at doing stuff. Since I've worked with a lot of engineers, but not so good at explaining it. That's where they need somebody who can explain it. And sometimes, although sometimes it doesn't work, that's why sometimes a great engineer and a great MBA are a beautiful thing together. Like the two
Mm-hmm.
folks who started Intuit, for example, would be an example of that. But you kind of, it's like Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak. Well, I actually spent some time at a concert accidentally with Steve Wozniak recently. He's really hard to understand what the hell he's saying. It really is. But Steve Jobs was
Some
pretty
code.
good at
Yeah.
explaining things, even though he wasn't really that good at building things. So you need both. You need the people who are in the body who can get stuff done, and the people who are in the body that can talk.
Yeah.
That's what it reminds me of.
Well, it's a shout out to Guy Kawasaki too. If you can explain something well to people,
Yeah,
that it goes well. Yeah.
Boy, can that guy explain things? Guy is brilliant.
yeah,
That
he's
guy is
exceptional.
dazzling.
When I interviewed him, I basically was just like, "Guy, just run the show." Basically, you're interviewing me at this point. My biggest my biggest joy is to get Guy to break. My whole thing is I for some reason there are interviews that I do straight up, and then
Uh-huh.
sometimes if I know somebody and I've talked to them, what I am trying to do is I'm almost having an Andy Kaufman experience where I'm like, but what if I can get you to pause and go, what the fuck did he just say? And I think there's a moment, and I can't exactly remember it, but I think it was something like he's like, "Well, next time we do this interview, we can have AI write the questions or something." And I was like, "Cool, I'm gonna have AI write the questions for Donald Trump, and then you can answer him," and because he had mentioned Trump a couple of times, and he was like, "I have nothing for that." And I was like, "Yes." You would
I
think
have
that I
nothing
would
for
want
them.
a good answer in a podcast, but actually, no, I want nothing. I find joy in it. Um, can I leave you another statement and then we just see where it goes?
Yeah, I love your interviewing style, by the way, because
Great style.
we have. I don't think we've done a lot of things. We have not been interviewed in quite this way
Mhm.
yet. So go for it.
This is
Yeah, please.
good. This is good. This is why I did that. If I know that you've done something 100 times, and also
Yeah.
you've probably now experienced friction in even just the interview process, let's make it different. Number 4 on my list was the quote, "Learn more from the mistakes of others. You can't live long enough to make them all yourself." You know who did the quote, but let's unpack that.
So very quickly, uh, what this quote actually was kind of connected to is a large body of research that shows people don't learn from their own mistakes because we explain
Mm.
our mistakes away. So you really need other people to make mistakes for us to learn about. And so that's the point, not that you can actually learn from your own mistake. And there's actually a lovely study of cardiovascular surgeons that shows that indeed that's exactly what they do.
Ooh,
They don't learn from their mistakes, they learn from the mistakes of other cardiovascular
it's
Mm.
it's also more efficient because
surgeons. Yes.
you can learn from more mistakes. It's
The
yeah.
library of mistakes, right, Bob? Just go to
Right.
the
Yeah, that's
library of
exactly what it
mistakes.
is.
Yeah, so there is a contrary example, just to be an academic. I think the way
Oh, I
to
like it.
but so there's an old venture capitalist I know, uh, Randy Commissar, and former executive. I used to hang out with him some, and he used to talk about mistakes. And he had this argument, which is not evidence based, but his argument was, well, because the quote that you learn more from other people's mistakes, it's more efficient,
Mhm.
you're more detached emotionally and so forth. But Randy's argument, and this is probably in Weird Ideas That Work, one of my books, is that the amount of pain that you feel from your own mistakes is so much higher that it might be more efficient to learn from other people's mistakes.
Yes.
But it might be more effective to learn from yours, just because the amount of pure pain is, as long as you can admit it to yourself, of course, because some people can never admit mistakes to themselves. So that's the proviso there.
It makes me start thinking about, like, obviously you touch a hot stove, you're going to learn, because there's no explaining that away. You touch the hot stove. I think it's it's death by a thousand cuts. It's those little things that you do that are inherently wrong in your process that you cannot you can explain them away, you can justify, and then, this is where our mutual friend Abhijit calls me out a lot on some of the things that I'll be like, well, I can't do this. He's like, won't. Not can't, won't. And I was like, yeah, you're right. We'll close with something fun, but before we do that, I loved first mover disadvantage, because so often we talk, again, all the expletives and contrarian things in this were my favorite. I mean, the general premise aside, but we get so many examples of first mover advantage. Like, oh, this is great if you do this, and Netflix and blah, 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 and blah, blah, blah. And it can be true, but I love unpacking first mover disadvantage, because there are just as many examples.
Well, the weight of the evidence. I mean, in the example, in the snide or cute thing we say is the second mouse gets the cheese, or the third or the fourth mouse, the other ones get killed. But this is a variation of learning from other people's mistakes. Is that you can hang back and watch it, and also, I'm not sure about Netflix, but there are in most cases where people think there was a first mover, such as Amazon in books. Or Facebook was not a first mover either. That and boy, there sure were a lot of automobile companies formed before Toyota or General Motors or something. Hundreds or like thousands, probably, Huggy, isn't it? Like the incredible number of automobile companies. So the evidence is not that it's sort of against first mover advantage. So that's an argument for sort of slowing down and watching people screw up and then deciding what to do. So being, a fast follower is what the evidence say is the teams and people that tend to win.
I think that'd be a great example of what Elon does. Not that I'm necessarily always giving Elon credit for things, but this didn't work. Look at how this didn't work. See if you can fix it. Those are generally, PayPal wasn't the first, Tesla wasn't the first, and SpaceX wasn't the first.
Yep. I mean, Elon has many technical skills, or many skills, but I'm just not a fan. I did write a book called The No Asshole Rule, and I just think that he's disqualified on that basis. I'm sorry.
I love that when I picked up your book, I picked up Kara Swisher's Burn Bill, and I love that she has 2 negative quotes from him on the back cover, just to make her book sell more. When I write mine, I am doing that. I am copying that trope, because I just love it's like, if somebody thinks highly enough of you to call you on expletives, that's probably a good enough reason. We're in the same mind of that. I just thought about sometimes when you see people go from so many different industries, and he's not the only one, but that the commonality isn't the tech or even the where they want to go with it. It's just understanding that sometimes the skill is just looking at what is available, what could need improvement, and then going from there. I, as a PR person myself, I am constantly pulling a Hodor and just like, hold, wait for somebody to screw up, or wait for somebody to give you an indication of how you should act. The other thing I have this strong premise on is that in the attention economy, we so often get wrapped up in, we need people's attention. We're struggling to get people's attention. And this is what I took away from the book, and I'm writing a piece about this right now. I took your contrarian view about friction, and I decided, well, this absolutely applies to my own philosophy that I didn't put out. But if we're trying to get attention, that there's this blank space where, okay, is anybody actually paying attention to what your next thing is, other than you? Is anybody really in the market going, I have to hear your next press release, I have to know what your next... certainly, if you're launching a major project or you're doing a whole new rebrand, I get it. But most of the time, we're so caught up in feeling we need to do something to keep people's attention that there's this wonderful calm in this blank space of, actually, you could just try some stuff and nobody's going to be paying attention. And maybe your strategy shouldn't be to do neutral things to maintain, but actually take risks and do a variety of things. And if one thing hits, it's great. So again, the book got me to think in a contrarian way about a completely different industry.
Oh,
so
that's great.
that I appreciate. When I close these, no, absolutely. When I close these, I do something called keep it short. The questions are short. Your answers can be however long you want to be. If we want to be here until 6 p.m. Eastern, that is totally fine by you. I don't think we will be.
I don't think we
will. So I'm going to do this back and forth. Huggy, question number 1. Company you have found to be the most interesting when you've been doing this research and these interviews?
Ooh.
It's like picking your favorite child. I know it's terrible.
Department of Motor Vehicles.
You said positive things about a DMV too. Yeah.
We're digging further.
Oh, nice. Love it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. So Huggy and I had a glass of bourbon with a Google executive last week, and she's a good friend of ours. And we said to her, "You at Google, you really need to study the California DMV to figure out how to get rid of some of the friction in the organization." And we were not joking.
I know, that's the best part. That, having read the book, that is absolutely true. Also, as a former California resident who has experienced that, I found it to be a wonderful utopia that I did not experience at that time. But I'm glad it has fixed itself.
Well, that was our point. It seemed like we couldn't believe how much it improved. That's
wild.
So the DMV where I had the great experience in Redwood City, California, that we talk about. So that's where I got my driver's license when I was 16 years old. So, I was probably there all day with my mom. So things have gotten better. Anyway.
Now work on the utilities in local California news. Bob, question number 2.
Yes, sir.
Worst question you've ever been asked, either doing an interview.
The worst question that I've ever been asked?
Yeah, the worst question. Yeah.
Oh God! There's a long list of bad questions, but I guess I've been asked about when I lost my hair once. I didn't really like that very much, to tell you the truth. I thought that was impolite. But I think that the worst questions that I've been asked are actually things that are along the line of tell me exactly what the steps are, the exact steps. So there are various questions like this. What are the 5 steps that I should take to make this happen? And by the way, I've been asked this by Stanford undergraduates in particular my entire life, who want me to plan every step of their life for them. And
worth a shot.
Worth a shot. And so what I try to do is I try to have a contrary perspective. And sometimes there are steps you can take, but for most things that are management, I'm talking about a genre of questions. I don't like ones where they want to know the step-by-step instructions. When it comes to friction fixing or other sorts of difficult leadership, changing organizational culture, improving a group or whatever, it's not like you can take out the assembly manual and put together your IKEA desk. It's a lot harder than that, and it's a messy process. So a lot of when I work with companies and when I advise people who are going through difficult decisions in their life, my perspective is to try to make them more comfortable with randomness and messiness. And so those are the kind of questions that I don't like. So that's a more generic answer. And I will tell you that Huggy's much more comfortable with randomness and messiness than me. He's like the master of it. So I try to learn from the master's feet. Yeah. It's true though. You're really good when you think they're screwed up.
I think there's a nugget to learn from too in that, which is that if you're asking somebody with more expertise a question, that question in relation to friction has to be a quick answer. It has to be a quick email. If I'm emailing a very, very famous person or someone who I do not know, or I am quick, I am succinct. Once you get to know me, I am not. I talk. But you have to think about it in reverse, right? If somebody asks you something that you can answer that's based on your expertise that costs you 15 to 30 seconds of your time and just is like, what's your one takeaway on this? Or where should I start? Where should I start is good. But, some specificity to the question, right? If you're saying, hey, basically, could you fill out a 2-hour form about how I should navigate life?
Yeah.
I don't even care if we are best friends. I have best friends that I'm not going to do that for. I'm going to be like, too long, didn't read. I will send you to a link.
Right.
Here is the name of my psychologist. But all of those things. Huggy, question 3, and then we'll wrap this up and get on the road. What's the next book?
Oh God, I haven't asked him that. What's it? Okay, yeah. What's the next book, Huggy?
I think that's a testament to the material and wanting to continue to unpack it. But keep going. Mm. Yes, buy it. Mm.
So
I think with books they should open minds and open opportunities, and if we don't do that, then we shouldn't write them. I love that.
Well, so I mean, just to give you, if you just look at, and Huggy's been involved in some of these emails and some not, but if you look at my emails for the last 3 days, I've had conversations with people about nudging them and saying, can we do some experiments and what progress have you made? The largest cement company in South America, Google, we've already mentioned, the Department of Motor Vehicles, we mentioned, Stanford HR, and the San Jose Sharks. Those are, so just to give you like a range of and the Stanford healthcare system too. So and I'm not saying like we're doing a cure, but we're trying to get people focused. What's the subtraction mindset like, and what can you do given where you sit and what power you have to make things better? And in some ways, that's a question that has to be asked over and over again. And we also need to learn some routines for people to do that too.
I love it, that the book keeps you passionate about wanting to kind of keep exploring it, right? Right. So yes, it's an end product if you're bored with it, or if you've moved on, or if you've talked about the past, but you're very much talking about something that is past, present, and future tense. It is. It needs to be addressed. This is wonderful. I will close with this, and thank you so much for joining. Huggy, if you want an idea for the next book, I think it's unpacking those 5 things that Bob should have answered for the students. only as a long con. Like, you get Bob involved in it without him really knowing that's the purpose of the book, and then over time at the end he realizes, oh, this was a 3-year-long heavily researched joke.
So if you take these 5 steps, I guarantee you to be rich, happy, and to live a long time. I can do it right now. I don't know what they are, but how can you come up with the 5 steps? We'll sell it.
Oh, Bob, we almost stuck the landing, because if you had said, actually, just do this. I'm going to edit this out. Bob, tell people that you have the 5 steps for everyone to be everything.
Of course. Yeah, I'm sure they exist. I'm sure that book exists. Anyways.
No, I would have loved it if we had closed the episode and you were like, you know what? Actually, I'm going to tell you these 5 steps that are going to change your life, and then I just hit stop.
Okay. Well, John Lennon said love is all you need, but I think he was wrong. Anyway.
I appreciate this so much. Thanks for doing this.
Thank you so much, Jeff. Yes. Yeah. I honestly, this is the hardest I've had to think during an interview, like about 2 months. Yeah. So, because we kept having to say, because it was really hard to give you canned answers.
I know. Oh, yes. All right. Mission accomplished.
Mission accomplished.